project started with my own experience with the deaf and hard of hearing students that I work with. If you want to, just move our students in there. And so I've kind of been spread out the last year or so. There's not a whole lot of DHH teachers, and so they kind of spread me across 3 districts. And I see it in all 3 of the districts I work in. Reading and language arts is a huge deficit for our children. And so my experience is our kids struggle in this area because of their disability and the nature of it. So we're just going to kind of go through, and I want to share with you just some things that may help you if you're working with a child who has hearing impairments, who's struggling in learning to read. Okay, so I know you all probably know this, but I wanted to start with just kind of a general definition of decoding. So when we're talking about reading, decoding is being able to have the knowledge of letter sound relationships, letter patterns, being able to pronounce those words. And a lot of times our kiddos start out struggling because at an early age they don't have access to language because of their disability. They call it incidental language, and so they come to school having less language than their peers, their hearing peers. So they're already at a deficit there. A lot of them don't understand how to decode. And so the nature of their disability, they don't have access. And we know that access is something that both visually and hearing impaired children struggle with. It's not always a cognitive issue that's causing them not to be able to read. A lot of times that is there, but in certain cases it's just the access component. And so we're already kind of starting off, at a disadvantage. Yeah, thank you, Chastity. So that kind of brought me to just kind of my own exploration of what would work. And I have one child, and he keeps me up at night. I know you all know those kind of kids that you want to help them in so many ways and you don't know how. That's kind of the inspiration for this project. So with him, he's 8 and he's still not reading. Now, he repeated 2 grade, I think he repeated kindergarten twice, it was a K1 split, and he's still struggling. So, just to give you a little backstory, this child will not wear his hearing aids. It's just a battle. The people around him, they don't feel like it's worth it because he says they hurt. If children don't wear those from an early age, they're always going to hurt. They're not going to get used to those hearing aids at the age of 8. So in that way, I feel like I've kind of lost that battle already. But when you talk to this child and you ask him, hey, what does dog start with? He can't say duh because he can't hear duh. He can only hear parts of words. And so it's a real struggle to get him to be able to hear these sounds. So with visual, what we want to do here with a child like him is because he has such a deficit in his hearing, I've used a lot of visual strategies with him, and that's kind of what this presentation is. It's just using all the senses that we can to help that child hear those sounds. And there's a lot of different things you could use. There's a lot of specific curriculums that may not be suitable for your child. One of them is visual phonics. I know KVEC has offered that training to us. It's a really good training and it's a good program. It's kind of like ASL on the hand. It's kind of like ASL for phonics, basically. And it is really good, but if you don't have that every day for that child, it's not going to make a big difference. You kind of have to be with that child every day, and when you're spread across 3 districts, that's not possible. So what I've been trying to do is kind of doing these, but letting his other teachers kind of use these too. Sign language will help if they're willing to do it. A lot of families won't do it. A lot of children are resistant to doing signs. And I don't know if that's because of the area that we are in or just maybe the lack of access to it. But anyways, there's some good programs here. Foundations for Literacy is something that preschoolers can use. But with him, any way that he can engage is going to be helpful to him. So visual has a lot of different ways that you can incorporate into your reading instruction. Tactile and touch. There's a lot of ways that you can incorporate tactile. I think one training we used gel bags, and I wanted to bring some of those. I didn't get to, but basically it's just a Ziploc bag and you kind of duct tape over, and it's got like hair gel in it. And so you use that to kind of spell out words, and it kind of gives them, well, it's fun for them, but it also incorporates another way for them to be able to sound out those words and remember how to spell certain words. And bead strings, sandpaper, slime, all my kids love those. I brought some tap lights today, it's out at my project, but those are they're like $1 a piece. And so, for instance, if you're teaching cat, so the child can just hit that tap light for k, and then t, or act, and whatever words you're looking for, that kind of provides both visual and tactile. And then, I don't think we can say enough about kinesthetic, especially like in kindergarten. I know you guys probably have, you've worked with a lot of great teachers. You probably have a lot of different approaches, but one teacher in particular uses this, in everything. It's all day long. So when you're doing alphabet and they're going over the sounds, these kids are not sitting. They are standing, they are dancing, they're doing all the motions. They know every, motion for every letter and every sound. And those kids, their math scores shot through the roof. And I can't say enough about this approach. This goes back to even, you guys have heard of procedural memory. Like, for instance, if you play the piano, you learn how to play piano when you're young, and you're older and maybe you've lost a lot of your memory, that's still going to be there because it's procedural. So this kind of goes into that too. You're creating pathways, you're creating, there's just a lot going on when we use kinesthetic input. So taste and smell, there are so many different things you can find now on Pinterest, or just Google any sort of it's like sensory putty. There's one that you can even make for anxiety. You can add some lavender to it. You can add, all kinds of things you can do. Essential oils. I haven't used a whole lot of this. I'm just not where I'm going from place to place. I don't necessarily carry a lot of that with me, but it's still there, and it's still good for those kids to have something fun and something that they will be able to tie another sense to. And so, and I had a lot more that I wanted to share, and I told Chastity, I kind of pared it down because reading is so vast. There's so many ways and directions you can go. There's reading comprehension, reading fluency, there's decoding, which is what we just focused on this time because I felt like that was the area I needed to focus on the most. So it's very broad. So I did have to cut a lot of that out, but I wanted to focus on just if you are in a situation where you are working with a deaf or hard of hearing child, these are the best practices to keep in mind when teaching reading. So there's an ESP test. You can find it on this website. So this is going to tell you what students have usable access to sound and what students don't. So we know there's levels of hearing loss just like there's levels of anything else. A lot of my kiddos are mild to moderate. So I have one that's profound in 3 districts. So it is a low incidence disability, but it does happen. But not usually early on. So when you're teaching reading and you are learning foundational skills for reading and you have a child who is deaf at any level, they're going to struggle in reading unless these things take place. So this is just basically kind of like a formative assessment, if you will, to just kind of see where they're at, what we need, and how much they are able to hear. And you can also do like a functional listening evaluation. That's something I do. If you reach out to your district's DHH, they can come and do an informal one for you. And that can tell you how they hear when there's distance, how they hear when there's background noise added to the room. It's going to tell you a lot of things, and I think it's important to start there because you don't know how much hearing loss they have. I've got a kiddo that's leaving the district, and he's not wearing his hearing aids. So when he shows up at this new district, I asked him, I said, how will they know you have a hearing loss? And he's very shy, so I'm not sure if he's going to be able to advocate and say, yes, I have a unilateral loss, that means one side. You know, I do need this, I do need that. He's one of those kids, he's not low functioning, so he's probably just going to slide right by him. But he needs to be able to say that, you know, that I do have a hearing loss. And my point is, you may not know that that child is struggling. So this is a good place to start. You always want to make sure they're wearing their devices. That is probably my biggest battle, is just encouraging children to wear them, encouraging parents that they need them. A lot of them don't. I've got some that wear them like they're wearing glasses, like they will not take them off no matter what. But then I've got some that refuse. And I even had, like the child that inspired this project, I mean, at one point he would see me and he would just freak out because he knew that he was going to have to wear his hearing aid. And at some point I just stopped because I didn't want to be the hearing aid police, and we weren't getting anywhere. So don't push it, but encourage it. And this device here is for kids that have like the Connect clip. It's like the modern version of the FM system. So that would go with their hearing aids, and then the teacher wears like you've probably seen them, they wear like a little speaker, and it goes directly to their Bluetooth hearing aid. And so you want to find out how much support they're going to need. Like if they already know a lot of their sounds and a lot of their CBC words, then I wouldn't start with doing the letter sounds. I would just start wherever they're at. So you may not have a child that needs all of these supports. Maybe they need some, but you might have one that needs a lot. So this was a huge factor for this student that inspired this project. Out of all the kids I've tested, and I've been doing this for 6 years now, for this particular position, all the kids that I've tested, he scored the lowest. And I mean, I'm talking 0% on the last 3 portions of the functional listening evaluation. So that test covers distance, and it covers background noise, and then access to visual facial cues, which is just lip reading. This child struggled more with distance than he did with not being able to see my face. So a teacher, where do they normally stand? Usually right here, right? For a child like this, they need to be that close. So, like for instance, when we test this child soon, like I had to have a written statement for him to be able to be tested from his audiologist, because he can't hear past 3 feet if he's not wearing those devices. So if he's not right up on you, 3 feet right up on your face, he's not going to hear you at all. So distance is a big, big factor. So keep that in mind if you have one of those students in your classroom. And then you want to look at and examine what the student's strengths are and what are the weaknesses, and try to come up with a way to remedy that or to help that or support that. He seemed to have more trouble with initial sounds. So when I would ask him what cat started with, for instance, he would just look at me and just be puzzled, like he had no clue, because he can't hear them. So he would guess M or some other consonant. And inside I was like screaming, because I was like, man, we really gotta help him. But it's really hard when they won't wear those devices. So you've got to use every possible toolbox that you have access to. And this is another one. So this child, when I pull him to work with him, I can only pull him by himself because I don't have any other hearing impaired kiddos at that school. And so legally, I'm not going to be pulling a bunch of kids for hearing impaired services. It's just him by himself. And I realized this, a colleague pointed this out. He would break down for me. No matter what I did, he would break down. Because I was asking him to give me information that was based solely on him and his ability. Well, when he would go with my colleague in her group, or her reading group, he was like flourishing. And she was like, oh, he does so great. He has all the right answers. And I was like, oh my goodness. She said, listen, I can tell you exactly why he's breaking down on you when he's by himself. And I just didn't put it together. But he has nobody to look at when he's with me by himself. He has no peers to look around for clues. But with her and her group, he does. And this is a huge, huge part of why a lot of kids with hearing impairments, a lot of people think they have maybe something underlying, like ADD, maybe they have some focus problems. It's usually them just trying to localize sound and or looking at peers for clues. Because they have to know, like, oh, if the timer rings on our center, I'm not going to hear that sound, but so-and-so is going to know, and I'm going to do what they're going to do. So they really do look to their peers for help. So that's important to keep in mind. And so whenever you are teaching phonological awareness, you want to make sure you're including all the senses that you possibly can. And they call it multimodal now, but you know, we can incorporate these things into our lessons and make them much more memorable. Students have a better chance of remembering those grapheme-phoneme relationships if they're presented through multiple ways and modalities. And a lot of them can use phonology. Like I said, a lot of my kids are not severe. I do have one, and maybe two, but unless they transfer in that way, I just don't happen to have a lot right now. They can use what they call residual hearing, which is what you have, what you already have, and they can usually do okay. But also these kids may or may not have become deaf or lost their hearing early on. Sometimes kids can lose their hearing because they get sick and they have a fever. I had one kid that did that. He was 12, he was fine, but after, I don't know, he had a fever, he lost his hearing. Some kids, like the one that I'm working with for this project, he was deaf to begin with, so he was born with it. So it really does depend on each individual child. And I think the big takeaway from this is, if in doubt, just break it down. You want to teach words, and really that should say sounds, not necessarily words. You may not be there yet. You may have to back up and really start from scratch and teach letters and then letter sounds individually, intentionally, and explicitly. So, I mean, I'm talking, over and over, making sure they have the fluency before you move on to the next concept. And you want to give them as much support as possible. I asked a seasoned teacher yesterday, was finishing up and putting finishing touches on all this. I mean, when I say seasoned, I mean she's been there. And she was like, I said, what is your biggest, what would you say is the most important part of teaching reading? Well, one thing you could not teach it without: repetition, over and over and over and over. And so I think that really does say a lot about, and I think that's true in a lot of things, not just reading, but to be able to be fluent at something, you need to be able to do it easily, and you're going to have to review and you're going to have to practice it. And so the research that I pulled from for this project they're specific for DHH kids, and so it's basically just summing up that the phonology and the speech reading are not enough to crack the reading code. We've got to give them all the supports we possibly can, and that goes for, all of our kids need those supports. It's not just kids with hearing impairments or visual impairments. They all need support, and they all need the chance to succeed, and we've got to be able to be that, provide that for them. There's a lot of resources and references that I had online, and this little handout that I gave you, just take it with you, but there's a lot of little things you can use your phone and scan. The first one is a Foundations for Literacy sample. We had talked about that. This is an actual sample though, so you can use it. And it's a full-on, it's not just one page, it's like a full-on PD document. So you may want to use that with one of your kids. The early speech perception test is on there. If you feel like maybe there's a kid that would benefit from it, let me go back to that. And there's a phonics resource. It has a lot of different, I don't know, I felt like it was a good, there's a lot of resources and you get to a lot of things when you start digging. But that I felt like was a good one. And then the last one I included on there is, it's just kind of like an ABC of phonemic awareness. I feel like those words get thrown around a lot, and I don't know that that people understand really what that is. I know I didn't before I started this project. I was kind of at a loss with this child, and he still struggles, but more than anything, I think it's more of the devices and his will to participate and learn, and it's a whole other type of battle. I mean, but this will help if you have a child that's struggling to read. So language arts is one of our kiddos' weakest areas. Most of our kiddos are really good in math because it's concrete. I can see it. I don't have to talk to you about it. You don't have to talk to me about it. I know it. But reading instruction and language arts, it's just a whole other, and it goes back to access and the nature of the disability of hearing impairment. Well, that is all I have, and I will let Ms. Danielle take over. And if you have any questions, I'll have